everybody, it's Frankie-Lou. I'm coming to you today from Grow Together Homestead Part 2, where I am doing some garden prep today. It's just the beginning of February, and here in my Zone 3 garden in Alberta, I actually find that it's way too early to really do even my winter sowing, which I like to wait until the end of the month to get that started. But there are other things that I can do to prep for the upcoming season, and one of those things is to prepare my winter sowing containers. I have so many videos on that subject if you're interested in, but I do have to be working outside while I'm doing this because this plastic is toxic as I melt it. I figured this was a really great opportunity to discuss some of the things that can be done to prep for the upcoming gardening season, particularly in harsh conditions. I'm going to be in a really unique position this year, and I have to do a lot of preparation because I'm actually going to be gardening in two different Zone 3 gardens this year. One here just outside of Calgary at the homestead. The other garden that I'm also going to be working at is another Zone 3 garden, but this one is located in Golden, BC. So it's unique. I'm going to be getting to do two Zone 3 gardens on either side of the Rocky Mountains. So I'm quite excited about that. And I have to do a lot of prep because I'm going to be filling a lot of garden space up. I figured this was a good chance to discuss some of the strategies that I use to get the best yield out of the short growing conditions and the harsh growing conditions that I have to deal with. So here we go. Here are some of my top tips. Also, I'm going to be touching on a lot of different stuff here, and this is just a basic strategy discussion. There are also tons and tons of videos on my channel if you want to subscribe that have each of these different strategies discussed in more detail. So first off, the most important thing that I have found over the years in dealing with harsh conditions and getting a good yield is to focus just as much on the life underneath the soil, the biodiversity within my garden soil, as the life that's above my soil. Honestly, we really need to start taking better care of the microscopic organisms that are caring for our plants, because it's those things that we can't see that are actually bringing the most nutrition through to our soil, particularly when you're thinking about drought conditions. A lot of people want to focus on fertilizers and NPK, but if you want to ensure that you're going to have continuous feeding of your plants, it's better to be focusing on things like mycelium, which provide a network that brings nutrition directly to the soil, to the roots of your plants, and the bacteria and the worms and all the other wonderful things that are actually making those nutrients that are in your soil more soluble for your plants. There are several things that you can do to help with that. And these are also things that are going to help you with drought conditions, because we are facing that here in the Calgary area this year. Definitely going to be facing some drought conditions, it looks like, which isn't rare for us here. There are three different strategies that I like to use to keep that soil healthy and to help deal with these erratic conditions. And I call those the 3 C's, and that is composting, companion planting, and crop rotation. If you think about those three things, composting, yes, it is a form of mulch as well. Using compost is also a really great way of amping up the biodiversity of your soil, which is, as I said, is something that a lot of people seem to not think very much about. So yes, having a compost bin, and there will be there's plenty of material already available on the channel about how to build a compost bin, and I'm going to be experimenting with a few different composting methods up in Golden this year, so I look forward to sharing some of those learnings with you as well. Crop rotation, that's really important for several reasons. Number one, you don't want to be taking the same nutrients in and out of your soil. You want to be able to balance that a bit, but number two, it's really great for pest control. The critters that come into your garden that maybe aren't so beneficial, when you move your plants around, you do have a tendency to mess them up a bit. You're not providing them with an all-you-can-eat buffet every spring when they start emerging from their nesting sites in the soil. And as I said, I will go into more detail with that when it does come time to showing you how to place out your beds, but crop rotation is great for that. And then companion planting. This is good in a harsh region for multiple reasons. Often a lot of the companion plants that you can use actually help to deter pests, while other ones help to bring the beneficial pollinators to your plants. They also can act as a living mulch. Nasturtium is wonderful for that. That's one of my favorite companion plants. And the other thing is they can provide different nutrients and take different nutrients from the soil. So let's say you have a vining tomato plant growing up on a trellis, and you also have scarlet runners running up that same vining trellis. That scarlet runner is doing some nitrogen fixing, and it's also bringing pollinators to your plants. And then if you also put nasturtiums around that, it's deterring some of the pests, and it's also providing a living mulch to that plant. You can get a higher yield because you're planting multiple plants in one area. So if you do happen to have a crop failure, which happens to me every year, something just doesn't do as well as it should, but I'm not bummed out because I don't have just one crop growing there. I've got 3 crops growing there, and I'm still going to get a yield from the same area. Companion planting is one of those really easy things that you can start doing and seeing a change right away in the yield that you can get from your garden. Number 2, if you're able to, having raised beds is really helpful, especially if you do have poor soil like we tend to have around the Calgary area here. A raised bed's far easier to amend. You can fill it with good, nutritious, organic soil. You can plant more intensively with a raised bed because the human foot never reaches it, and you don't have to worry about making space for people to walk around and compacting the soil. It's far easier to affix things like coverings and trellis, because with our harsh conditions, having covers available on a cold night that you can quickly throw over your plants when we're going to have one of those really nasty cold nights at the end of August is going to save your tomatoes. It's going to save your cucumbers, etc. And having a raised bed that you can easily affix those things onto really can be helpful. Raised beds also do tend to heat up their soil faster, so you can extend your season that way. Another great thing about raised beds is there's not as much kneeling involved and not as much hard work. So if you're finding that you have some mobility issues or gardening isn't as easy as it used to be, being able to work with a raised bed really does help to lower the impact on our bodies. And last of all, I do find that raised beds are really great for minimizing weeding a bit. There are definitely weeds that are still going to try to make their way into your gardens, but it's not going to have as much of that blowover effect as you do with gardens that are in the ground. Another thing you might want to consider with your in your harsh conditions is starting to look more at your edible perennials. A great reason for this, not just the fact that it's you only have to plant them once and they come back repeatedly year after year, but for drought conditions, they do tend to be more drought tolerant than a lot of our standard annual vegetables are. Now, some examples from that of plants that do well with zone 3 growing conditions that are edible perennials that I love to use. Rhubarb. Rhubarb is fantastic, and it grows really, really well both here and in Golden. Sorrel. My sorrel crops last year were incredible, and I cannot wait to get my hands back on that lemony tart deliciousness again. Also, horseradish. Horseradish is wonderful. It does tend to want to take over your garden, so do be careful with your horseradish that you planted in an area that it's not going to overtake your garden. Lovage. Lovage is another example. There's lots of different ones that grow here. Perennial onions are also one of my favorites. Most of these edible perennials are some of the first things to come up every season. So when you've had a long, hard winter and you start being able to harvest stuff in early May, in a zone 3 area, that's pretty exciting. One of the things that I would hope you would consider is getting a head start on your seeds. And I definitely am a huge fan of the milk jug and winter sowing methods. Not only am I having better germination rates because my seeds have been cold stratified, but once the stuff does start to come up, these little things provide so much protection for my seedlings that they do very well in it, and then I don't have to worry about the whole hassle of hardening off. So do keep an eye out for more of the winter sowing tips if you haven't tried it yet. Winter sowing has been a game changer for me. And honestly, I have so much garden space that I'm going to be filling up this year that I would be completely daunted if I didn't know I had this method to help me produce lots of seedlings with very little work. When it comes to winter sowing in zone 3, I know a lot of places in the world they get started like at the winter solstice, but honestly, I've had my best results by holding off. Because of our erratic temperatures and conditions, the last half of February is the earliest I start, and most of my winter sowing doesn't begin until March and even into April with the more tender stuff. You really should wait until after Valentine's Day if you want to get started with winter sowing in a zone 3 environment. When you're choosing your seeds for winter sowing, when you're looking at your perennials, obviously you want to be looking at zone 3, but for your annuals, make sure you're checking out your seeds, your days to harvest dates on your seed packs. Those are under ideal conditions. So let's say here for the Calgary-Cochrane area, I never plant any, I tend to plant things that are like in the 65 to 70 days. I often have less than 90 days between frost, and some of those days aren't great, and some of those nights are really cold. Those nights that are really cold, your plants aren't really growing. So while my tomato may say that it's a 60-day tomato, days where it's below 6 at night, that tomato's not, that's a lost growth day. Okay, so you want to think about that. Don't, and the other thing is those days to harvest tend to be from when the plant is a seedling, when after it has grown its first set of true leaves. So that could be a couple of weeks from when you actually start growing that seed. So you might want to keep those things in mind too as well when you are choosing things to put into your ground in a zone 3 gardening condition. So I hope that was helpful. I'm really looking forward to sharing with you the results of the many experiments that I'm going to be doing on these 2 different zone 3 gardens this year on either side of the Rocky Mountains. And as always, I hope you'll ask tons of questions, and I also hope to take this chance to grow together today. Have a good one.